Hi everyone, Joe March here, and today we're going to be reacting to a video, but unlike other YouTube channels where reactions mean that people are going to tear things apart, this is going to be constructive, because this is actually a video that I like, and it's from a channel that I like a lot called Legion of Lilith. They used to be called Son of Lilith. Hopefully they don't mind me showing their video, but I feel like this video, particularly called The Truth About Shadow Self, is a good chance for me to explain a concept that I have, separate from what the video is about, which is that our subconscious minds are unique, and as a result, we each have our own way to connect to the formless or conceptual entities and things. I think, and I have this problem when talking to some other occultists who really believe their way is the only way. I think that each of us have our own way of interacting with this stuff, and Legion of Lilith has a very different way than me, but I still love all of Legion of Lilith's videos because the conclusions drawn are always the same things that I get with my own interactions into the occult and what have you. So I think it's great to show this style, and then I can pause and talk about my style and comparisons, because it'll help show what I'm talking about. And I think people get caught up on what's real and what's not, and really it comes down to each person's subconscious mind expresses this stuff differently. So let's just, you'll see as we watch. Let's go ahead and start watching. This is, again, for those who like this and want to go and support the original creator, it's Legion of Lilith, and this video is called The Truth About Shadow Self. So let's get started.
So today we will talk about a really important thing. This is something I never expected to film. And this will probably angry a lot of people.
Already I like it. That, separate from everything else, a lot of the stuff on Legion of Lilith is not about this particular topic, but I love that he starts it right off like this is going to piss people off, because anybody who's had an occult YouTube channel in the past, like myself, or currently like he does, and has gotten to a certain size, will note that people will get pissed off anytime you press buttons that say that the way things are laid out in a particular manual or in a particular path aren't exactly the way it is. So I'm already interested as soon as he says that. I know we're in for something good.
Or make a lot of people out of their mind.
Mm-hmm.
Or be controversial to a lot of people. But, you know, when I get something, it is my obligation to share it. Honestly, as it is said, without being chained by what others will think about it. So,
You can tell he sounds like he just doesn't even want to talk about this. And I've had these moments where I come up with something that I know is a good topic for the time, but I'm like, God, before I go on camera. So I know exactly what he's going through here.
essentially, today I called Abhichara Tantric Master of Dark Tantra. Shayayan is her name. She is essentially a female guru of Abhichara Tantric school. And she was the master of shadow magic and shadow spirituality. And she lives in a shadow underworld space.
So you can already tell here how this is a very different style than the styles that I have incorporated in my own practice and the things that I've shared. So to me, it's interesting to hear people who take a very different approach and what their experiences are. But it's also even more interesting, as you'll see, when we get further in, and a lot of the results are very similar to what I've experienced. And I think, again, the reason for picking this video specifically to go over is because I've done a lot of shadow work in the past, and I have, for fans of the old channel, I have a lot of videos on it, so it may be easier to see the similarities without me even having to point them out for people who followed my journey before.
As you can probably guess, she teaches a lot about shadows in a spiritual sense, what they are, And the first thing she told me as soon as I called her through the yantra you will see on the screen in front of you, the first thing she said essentially is the shadow self is simply accumulation of all negative energy within the soul. What it means. So our souls and our energy bodies are actually extremely huge, and they contain the memories not only from this life but also from the previous lives. It is enormous body of energy. A majority of it we are not aware of. And so, in order to tap into that potential in the Western sphere, in the Western sorcerers circles, they invented the concepts of the higher self, shadow self, spirit animal, etc. What they mean by it is actually those things are externalizations of aspects of the spiritual energy of the soul.
So you can see here exactly what I'm talking about. So Legion of Lilith uses energy, concepts of aura, things like that a lot when he discusses different topics. And that is not the vocabulary I use. It's not the way in which I experience these things. I'm not one of those people who have this sort of sight where you can see energy or colors that represent emotions or beings or flows of energy. That's never been my thing. And I think back when I first started, I used to think that meant there was some aspect of this that I just didn't get. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think it's that all of us are interacting with the formless, and then we have to give it a form in order to interact with it. So here we're talking about the concept of the shadow self. In order for me to interact with the shadow self, I have to visualize it in some way. It isn't actually material. It doesn't have a form that is correct. It's a part of yourself. It's your shadow self. So any form you give it is a representation of a formless thing. But that doesn't make it not real. But the form you're giving it is your own means of interacting with it. So for me, a lot of this stuff works in a very psychological way. For me, when he talks about how the aura is much larger than people know, and most people can't even perceive it all, this matches right up with my views that the subconscious mind is vast, and a lot of what goes on in your own subconscious is beyond even your knowledge, unless you're willing to delve in and do the work to explore it. So we're using a different vocabulary, and we have a different experience, but the end result of what is being said is the same thing. And the thing that he's delicately walking around here is the fact that the shadow self is you. It's part of you. A lot of people, the reason it's a shadow self is because people shun it away. People push it away. They don't want that part. A lot of people want to look at the shadow self as something to excise. And then some people, on the other hand, want to look at it as something to venerate. And so he's taking it down a notch, saying the shadow self is just negative energy built up within the self. Now, again, he looks at things from a very energy specific way. That's how his interactions with his subconscious mind translate what he's experiencing. So if he wants to understand how this is a part of you, he sees that as the energy within you. For me, I have a very active imagination when it comes to creativity as an author and whatnot. And though I don't see things as energies, and I see a lot of this as psychological, using the psychological terminology, I also interact with entities and parts of myself as external beings, but it's visions. And I also get flashes of things whenever I do meditations, like I'll see imagery and things like that, as opposed to energy. But the end result is still, when I worked with the shadow self, I needed to go back and heal things from my own past. And what I would see was those past experiences, things like that. But the point was focused on healing, and you'll see here, momentarily, again, because I've pre-watched this, that he's going to go into healing as well, but it will be a slightly different method. But if you can take your mind and recognize these as two different ways to translate some unseen, some non-tangible thing into something that makes sense, then you'll recognize that what I say when we talk about this stuff and what he says are actually the same thing. And that's, to me, what's fascinating.
So, for example, spirit animal is totality of elemental energy within the soul. Shadow is totality of negative energy within the soul. Higher self is totality of celestial energy within the soul. Necromantic self is totality of the death energy within the soul. For example, for Indians, for Native Americans, spirit animal was actually external spirit you find, and then it becomes kind of your familiar, and then you work with it. For Western sorcerers, they actually don't work with same spirit animals Native Americans did. What they refer to is totality of elemental energy within the soul. And I came to realize this because if shadow self is, as Chayayan says, simply totality of negative energy within the soul, then that same thing can be said for all other quote-unquote parts of the soul.
And so, exactly, he uses the terminology having to do with parts of the soul. He uses terminology having to do with types of energy. I would use terminology having to do with aspects of a person's subconscious, but we're talking about the exact same thing. To me, the spirit animal is your primal representation. It is the part of you that is the most primal, the most animal-like, being manifest into something you can interact with in order to learn more about yourself. That's the way that I, as someone who follows a psychological model and who uses the practice in that way, would look at that. But what he's saying to me, to someone who's experienced it, makes 100% sense. So again, the reason I'm showing this is because I feel like a lot of times people will feel self-conscious about using their own form of expression. They'll say like, oh, Joe, you've got these like modern day psychological terms. You're going to think that what I'm doing is old style or like lesser or something. It's like, no. It's just a different way of expressing the same thing. And sometimes it's the other way around. I'll even get caught up thinking like, oh, so like a legit practitioner who uses all the vocabulary like this is going to watch my stuff and go, yeah, I mean, it's different than what he's saying. But really, we're saying the same thing. We're just using a different vocabulary.
Which are taught in New Age Western sorcery circles. And this is really interesting because how we see them in a Western mindset, how we see those aspects, is we see them like externalized aspects of the soul, but in reality, they are not independent consciousnesses.
Correct.
They are simply our projections upon certain energy which flows through our extended energy body.
Yes, yeah. So again, you see, he's saying we're projecting it upon the energy and how it's we're projecting these concepts onto the energy body. I would say we project these onto our views of the outside world. We project them onto ourselves. We project them in one way or another. I have a different terminology, but what we're saying is the same. I don't use the energy terminology, but when I hear it, I 100% understand what he's talking about, and I can even see how to apply it within myself. For me, a lot of times, when someone like Legion of Lilith talks about seeing and feeling energy, it relates very heavily to my own feeling of my own emotion. When I experience my emotions, what that feels like. So I get how to even get into the states that someone like him is talking about, even though I don't see energy or experience it in that way. I think this is interesting because a lot of people, especially starting out into these practices, will think if they can't get some specific way of doing something right, there's something wrong with that. But you really have to figure yourself out. You have to figure out how your subconscious mind interprets things, whether it's something that gives images, whether it's something that sees things represented through energy, whether it's something that sees your own personality represented through characters like mine does, where you can speak to them almost like in a dreamlike state, or whether you're somebody who gets ideas and concepts just instantly, like, and people have given this flowery language, like they'll say like some people are clairvoyant, some people are clairaudient, but I think that's all confusing. What we're really trying to say here is the way the subconscious mind speaks with the conscious mind is different for different people. Forming that connection is how you get to learn about the self, which is what all of these practices are really about, is connecting the conscious and subconscious. For some people, that is expressed through energy. The visualizing the energies combining and becoming ordered and things like this has a representative effect to the subconscious of organizing and ordering your own life. For me, that's not how it appears. That's not how I do it, but I get exactly what's going on. And I would say that when I say that, it almost sounds pretentious, like my way is correct and this is what's happening. But that's my way of expressing it. For them, the energy way of expressing it is more correct than my subconscious way. But it doesn't matter, because again, we're trying to grapple with an explanation of something that's formless and giving it a representative form. So anyone who's done this long enough, I feel like, will recognize when they talk to someone who has a different style like this, how we're still having the same type of conversation. We could both talk to each other. I 100% guarantee me and Legion of Lilith could talk to each other using our own styles constantly and still have a conversation completely understanding each other.
So Chayayan, also taught me how shadow energy operates, how negative energy within aura operates. So when we are born, we inherit the negative energy from the previous lives, and we accumulate the negative energy from this life.
So this is a place where we might disagree, but only because I don't know if I believe in past lives or any of that sort of thing. I don't necessarily disbelieve it. I don't have proof for past lives in my own life. And most of the shadow work that I've done can be explained by my own traumas in this life. So a part of me thinks that past lives are a way to represent something that happened to you in the current life in a way that's more detached, in a way that allows you to analyze it without feeling as directly affected by it. But I could be completely wrong about that, because it's just, I haven't had that experience. Meanwhile, what he's saying about the shadow self being built up from trauma from the current life, that stuff I 100% agree with. To me, it builds a sort of persona, which is what I would call the shadow self. But what he's referring to it as is negative energy. But it's still a built up bunch of the stuff about yourself that you push down, whether you want to see that as energy or whether you want to see that as fragmented pieces of the soul, as the way my mind would look at it in this sort of dream state. You're still seeing parts of the self that need healed.
Every time we have a negative association with a certain thought or certain deed, when we associate negativity with certain thought or deed, it binds negative energy to that thought or deed, and then our thought or deed we deem negative, we deem destructive, increases our amount of negative energy within us.
Yeah, and so again, my way of explaining this is a little different, but has the exact same meaning. Every time we have a negative reaction towards something, that gets stored, in a sense, in our subconscious as something we want to avoid or push away. And if we do it repeatedly, then aspects of ourself that relate to that will start to push away and ignore. And that's when you can start projecting aspects of the self out on other people. That's when you can start ignoring aspects of yourself. That's when you start to build this shadow self persona. And so to me, again, I see things as personas because that's how I do my version of the work. But if you use energy language, negative energy makes just as much sense. It's a build up. You're taking. He's saying that when you give it that when you think about it negatively that way, you're building up this negative energy within your aura. And I'm saying when you think about it negatively, you're fractioning off a part of your psyche within your own subconscious and kind of piling it up somewhere, making it into this dark shadow. Visually, even, you can see how these two things are talking about the same thing. That's a pool of darkness within the self that needs to be brought to light in order to be purified. It doesn't have to be destroyed, it needs to be recognized, and then it needs to be reintegrated.
Quote unquote, empowers the shadow self. That negative energy absorbs other types of energy and mixes it and blocks it from expression. So essentially, in order to stop accumulating the energy of negative spheres, of negative worlds, of talas within the aura, we have to essentially stop judging ourselves. That's the most interesting part of this discovery. But
bring it to light and accept it.
Essentially, talk about something else said, because if shadow self doesn't exist as an external entity, it is simply a projection of negative energy within our souls, then how you approach work with that negative energy is not through summoning some external shadow. It's actually more effective if you do it as a form of energy work. So you need to find where that energy is, where that negative energy is, and then move it so that your energy field can flow. And it also explains why people who work with negative entities, such as asuras, demons from the Western mythology, all kinds of negative spirits across all different pantheons. In modern New Age circles, they usually talk about how work with those entities empowers the shadow self. Now, when we know that shadow self actually don't exist as anything external, that it is simply our projection on negative energy within the aura, what it actually means is that those entities we summon are negative, they are destructive in nature, and when you work with them you increase the amount of destructive energy within your aura. Now, for somebody who is a tantric practitioner, who is tantric ionist, negative energy isn't bad at all. Actually, we believe that through negative energy, through accumulation of it, we can commune with the highest of all truths and obtain ability to manipulate our own reality according to our own will. Those are essentially two principles of tantric ionism. But if we want to talk about Chai Ion, she is pretty easy to summon. So you simply draw the yantra you see on the screen during the night, and then you repeat Chai Ion, Chai Ion, Chai Ion, Chai Ion, while looking into the yantra. When you look into the yantra, you don't look into the lines, you simply look into the direction of the yantra, and you don't think about it. You simply look in its direction and you repeat the mantra Chayayan, 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 over and over again. And over time, from the yantra, the energy will start to flow. And as energy builds up, you continue chanting, you continue looking in the direction of the yantra. And over time, the energy of the tantric master, of the tantric guru of Dravidian Abhicharayanism will grow, and you will essentially become able to communicate with her or to feel her to the point of, how can I say, feel her to the point of no denial, so that you are sure that she is there. What I advise.
I would like to point out here that what you're seeing there is a sharing of the methodology used there. And what interests me is, once again, he's reaching out to an external source, formless being, so to speak. Whether you're someone of the mind that that is reaching out to a part of yourself, like diving into your own subconscious, which can be done through these hypnotic repeating statements, and then speaking to what I would call the teacher, the part of yourself that's the subconscious that interacts with the greater whole, the greater all, or whether you see this as reaching out to an actual external being that you pull through. You're still reaching out to something that doesn't have form, so you give it form. And this is part of why this is so interesting to me, because that's part of my practice as well. And so even though his practice is so different from mine, he's reaching out to a formless thing, and the answers he's getting back from his experience with that match the answers that I've gotten back when I've done similar. Even though his comes through his understanding, so his subconscious sees things through energy work and that particular pattern of working with things, and mine is through a much more psychological model. That's because of the way my subconscious is, I don't want to say tuned, because that makes it sound like we were born that way, and I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it's built up throughout your experiences, but it's because of the way my subconscious sees the world and the way his subconscious sees the world. But this formless something that we communicated with has given us the same answer, but in the form of the way that we view the world. In other words, translated through the lens of our subconscious mind. And that's the thing that I've been having trouble expressing. That's the key right there. That I feel like if I just say that without an example, people are like, well, okay, whatever. So I was like, we're going to sit through the video because A, it's a good video anyway, and B, because I think it really expresses what I'm trying to say with that in a way that probably makes more sense than what I just said.
What she also advised is that we, as tantric practitioners of the Left-hand path, there is one thing which is really important for us, which is not essentially discussed. So, because people don't understand what is the shadow self, and the fact that it actually doesn't exist, it's simply our projection upon the negative energy within our auras. And because people doesn't understand the nature of the spirits they are working with, they don't want to acknowledge in majority of cases that the spirits they work with are actually negative, they are destructive. I am not trying to say that destruction is a bad thing. Destruction is a really good thing according to the tantric kindness perspective. It is the necessary part of the universe through which we connect with the supreme truth. But you cannot deny, for example, that somebody like Gatisama, somebody like Kalanemi, Ashura, somebody like Rakshasi Lankini, somebody like Demon King Belial from the Western lore, you cannot deny that they are indeed destructive, and that they can have a really destructive effect on your environment.
Somebody like Tiamat.
Even baneful effect. But it doesn't mean that that banefulness and destruction cannot be used for positive purposes. For example, Asura Kalanemi can be used to inflict misfortune upon enemies, but he also can be used to remove misfortune from enemies by absorbing the negative energy. So what Chayayam told me is that there is one really important thing when you work with lower realms, especially Talic realms in Hinduism. What needs to be done is you essentially, a lot of people when they go into this, including me when I started, they want to immediately jump on a horse. They want to immediately work with higher gods without preparation. They want immediately the soul travel into different Talic realms.
So I'm curious if Legion of Lilith here is talking purely about people he's met who have wanted to jump ahead early, or reflecting on back whenever he first started. Because I definitely do this when I do videos. I'll say some people are like this when they first start out. And a lot of times what it is things that I've recognized that I did that I see other people doing. That's why I see it, is because I remember doing things incorrectly or something. And so I'll see people do it incorrect and I'll be like, oh yeah, I did this when I was. So a lot of times when I say people starting out do X, Y, or Z, it's, you could translate it to when I started out, I did these things. And so I am curious, when I hear this, I'm curious if this is the same thing that he's doing right now, if he's referring back to when he was younger and less experienced, or if he's talking about someone in actuality. That's a tangent, but it's just where my brain goes when I hear that.
Want immediately to work towards cities. They want to learn how to levitate the glasses, manifest money from nowhere, rise the Kundalini completely, destroy their enemies immediately, etc. And if you wanna work towards those things through many incarnations and many years, one fundamental thing is you need to learn how to go into Talic realms through yantras. But in this video, we will not talk about how to go into Talas. Instead, we will talk about how to prepare for it. The only way to effectively prepare for it is to absorb enormous amount of negative energy in your aura, and also to learn how to move that negative energy through the aura so you don't go insane. It is done essentially by calling spirits and telling them to give you enormous amounts of negative energy. This is a really hard process, this is a really difficult process, but it is a necessary process. And the last thing I want to, mention is that those externalizations of energies within the aura, like the higher self, which is simply the Western externalization of all celestial energy within the soul, all shadow self, which is simply Western externalization of all of the negative energy within the soul. Those externalizations are simply the sums of energy within the aura, in my personal opinion, which by nature has to be limited by my ego. I think that the only part of the self you should try to contact for spiritual decisions is your own Atman. It is the core of your soul, your divine essence. That should be contacted.
That is 100%, I would agree. And I refer to that as the teacher. So anyone who maybe understands the terminology that Legion of Lilith uses more than mine and has wondered what I'm talking about by the teacher, that's it.
Not the sums of spiritual energy within the aura, extended or smaller. So, my advice, if you are a Westerner and you try to practice Dravidian Lionism, please don't stop working with things such as shadow self or higher self, or I don't know, spirit animal in Western context, because it's simply externalization of certain energy within your aura and within your soul. You should try to access that energy directly through energy work. That's my message for today. And also, if we want to work with shadow self or shadow negative energy within us, we should try to do it through energy work and moving the energy through our aura. And that's difficult. I will in the future show some techniques how to do it, and that's everything I have to say. Thanks for watching and see you tomorrow.
Yeah, good stuff. And again, my version of that would be that you need to integrate that part of the self. In other words, you need to get to know it, to understand it, and to reintegrate it back into your own primal personality, or primary personality, I guess, so that you can accept those parts of yourself. So I view a lot of things through the lens of acceptance and reclamation of lost pieces. And that's the way that I interpret things. But I look at them in this very, I don't know how you would put it, like I'm okay with looking at them as formless things, in a sense, as opposed to having to give everything a more defined form just because of the way that I view it. I think if you look at things as energy, you're still going to be doing the same work needed. It's not better or worse, it's different. And I think it's really interesting when I hear him explain that, because I go, yeah, everything he's saying is 100% on point. And even though that's not my style, I can listen, recognize the similarities, and be like, yep, he's got it. So just wanted to share that with you guys to get maybe anybody who's overly caught up on their own style or confused about the lingo of different practitioners with different styles, or even people who have just been shouting the same thing from the rooftop, like, guys, we're all saying the same thing. I just wanted to express this in some way, to share that opinion. So yeah, that's it. I didn't really have anything else to say here. That's it. I mean, I sometimes I come on here and I'm like doing some hilarious comedy, and sometimes I come on here and I'm ragging on myself or whatever in a video. But this time I just wanted to share you guys a video. Again, that's Legion of Lilith. If you guys liked it and want to check out more of his work, yeah, I really like that channel. So until next time, safe travels.